We extend a warm welcome to our participants from all over the country for the webinar on rights and realities, expert insights into the rights of children with disabilities, a lifespan perspective. Organized by the Neuroaid and Research Foundation in collaboration with the United Nations India, the webinar is in a two-part series format covering issues commonly faced by the parents and caretakers of our Divyang community from birth onwards. I am Monica Kundu Srivastav, HOD, Occupational Therapy and Joint Head Administration, the Neuroaid and Research Foundation, and together with Mati Batra from the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, will take you through the sessions on topics covering early identification, intervention, including certification, mainstreaming concerns, and a brief overview of the National Institute of Open Schooling, or NIOS. Without further ado, may I request Mrs. Rajalakshmi Chandru, Trustee and Chief Functionary, the Neuroaid and Research Foundation, to deliver the welcome address.
Namaste to all of you, and a very, very good afternoon. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and staff of the Neuroaid and Research Foundation, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome our distinguished partners, UN India, NCERT, NIOS, and IOTA, our eminent speakers, and most importantly, our participants to this afternoon's webinar. An overwhelming 789 plus have registered, although I can see there are not many who have logged in yet. It's just about 120 who've logged in. We do hope that the others will. The next session, as you all know, is scheduled for the 22nd of this month. I am Rajalakshmi, one of the 5 founding members of our foundation and its chief functionary. I have a full-time assignment as Vice President, Patient Services at Apollo Hospitals, Delhi, as do 3 of my other doctor trustees. Sorry. The foundation is our passion. Our vision is to set up a state-of-the-art rehab center for the underprivileged with neurological deficits for all age groups, including children with special needs, those specially abled, developmental issues, post-stroke trauma, post-surgical, requiring an advanced level of physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, counseling, and special education services. This webinar, though conceptualized by our team, has been made possible mainly due to the unstinting support of our partners. Advocacy can only be effective with partnerships. This is the fulcrum on which we can move forward. Thank you once again, and welcome to all of you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your valuable inputs to this, and thank you for setting the tone of the session. I would really like to welcome Dr. Huma Masood. She is a National Program Officer, Gender Education with the education sector at UNESCO. I was 1998, so she has a tremendous amount of experience around education, around gender, and her approach towards her work has been very intersectional, and she has been very focused with the disability. She has also a PhD and an MPhil in Regional Development Applied Social Sciences with research on educational occupational paradigms in social and economic policies for women in India from JNU. And we would really like to hear from you, Humaji. Welcome.
Then inclusion we see is enshrined in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Quality inclusive education also constitutes a vital element of the new Sustainable Development Agenda. The overarching principles of SDG is to leave no one behind. 5 of the 17 SDGs include explicit reference to persons with disabilities, and including SDG 4 on education, which is led by UNESCO. Then, of course, there's UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which we call UNPRPD, and it has already finished its 10th anniversary, and it provides an opportunity for us to also review and progress and see what progress have we made further. If we look at the national level, then you have to go back to the next slide now. So if we look at the national level, we know that one, Government of India has UNSDF and inclusive quality education as a top priority, and it's on its agenda. We also, I mean, most of us, we know that there's a RPWD Act 2016, and it now has expanded its coverage, say, from 7 to 21 disabilities. So we have that position to work in maximizing our work in all the 21 types of disabilities. Every child with benchmark disability between this age group 6 to 18 years will have the right to free education, it says, and many more things have been provided in this act. The government also launched Inclusive India campaign in June 2017. Then we also have Samagra Shiksha program and the NEP 2020 of India, which has been hailed as a policy ushering India in a new era of educational reform. UN lauds these initiatives. But as I'm sure you will agree, we need to do much more to make inclusive education for CWDs and PWDs a reality in India. Now, most of you in this online room work at the level of policy and practice to ensure that children with disabilities are integrated into educational systems and that their learning needs are fully met. So let us see and jointly try to review and look at the data and see if the rights are met. And what better way could be but to analyze the data even if there is lack of real-time data, which we know. So if I look at my next slide, you will see that, no, this is not the slide. I think we need to go, yeah, this would be better slide to talk about our data issues. So when we look at the data in 2011, we see that 7.62% of India's total population with disability was children, at approximately 2.04 million children out of 26.8 million of disabled people. UNESCO produced a State of the Education report, what we call N for Nose. And in this report, which we published, we looked at the 2011 census, which indicated that there are almost 7864636 disabled children in India, which constitutes 1.7% of the total child population. 3/4 of children with disabilities under the age of 5 and 1/4 between the ages of 5 and 19 do not attend any educational institutions. So when we are talking about rights and realities, this is what we saw in 2019. The report also noted that only 61% of children with disabilities aged 5 and 19 were enrolled in school, and compared to 71% overall when all children are included, then the percentage is pretty low. Moreover, 12% of children with disabilities have had dropped out, and 27% never attended any educational institution. So a large number of disabled children were either not attending school or they opted for an online mechanism which is called National Institute of Open Schooling. When I go down further, I see that we also have data available where it's in the UDICE. Now that again presents a very grim picture. It highlights a persistent and almost static enrollment of children with disabilities over the years. In 2013 and 14, the enrollment of disabled children in school education was 1.1% of the total number of students. This figure declined to 0.9% in 18 and 19, and the gender parity in enrollment of girls with disabilities also persisted. If we look at the higher education, then it's another issue. And in the higher education, what we see is that the state-wise total enrollment, which is like 38.5 million, out of which only 92831, that is 92,000, almost a lakh, were PWD, as compared to 85,877 in 2019. And among these, if we look at the disaggregated data, there's only 47,830 male and almost 45,000 female. So, despite the articulation of our PWD Act, RT Act, New Education Policy 2020, looking at the data challenges, we find that education for CWDs and PWDs is not on a right track. And one of the reasons could be that we don't have enough data, and it could be that there are data gaps. Yet, whatever we saw in 2011, 19, whatever, not much has changed. Now, there could be many factors, and we also tried to look at, in this document and otherwise, that what are the challenges and issues. So, what we found is that we lack inclusive policies. That means we do have schemes and policies and programs sitting in different departments and ministries, but yet they are not inclusive or are in silos. Existing laws governing education for people with disabilities are also very ambiguous. Let's look at this. That in 2016, we had this act. Educational institutions were to provide reasonable accommodation according to the individual's requirements and provide the necessary support, individualized or otherwise, in environments that maximize academic and social development, consistent with the goal of full inclusion. However, we see that the term reasonable accommodation, individual support, and full inclusion have not been properly defined, and therefore this very thing leaves room for arbitrary implementation. So that is also one of the cause we noticed. Then there are other issues also, like, which most of us in this room would know: inaccessible school facilities. Major roadblocks, other roadblocks to education are rigid curriculum, no flexibility available, inaccessible infrastructures, absence of modified assessments, lack of awareness, social stigma, quality teacher training, lack of right and accessible learning materials, lack of awareness of government-run programs, and of course, limited financial resources and funding. And we also saw that during COVID-19, all these greatly impacted the learning of children and persons with disabilities. So, if we look at, I think we are moving ahead to the way forward. Thank you, Aarti, for doing that. But my slides are generic. I'm more focused on what what I'm saying actually. So it's kind of not that I made too many slides. So what we found and how UNESCO supports is, like, for example, we made a evidence-based document which we call N for Nose. But what we also do is that we work with education to create educational opportunities for students with disabilities. If you go on our website, you'll find a lot of materials and resources available. We are very much strictly for fighting discrimination, and we always encourage that governments, member states, institutions, partner organizations, all educational institutions should work to reduce stigma and discrimination. We also look at how we create inclusive cities. What we mean by that is having inclusive environment, accessible environment, so that more and more children would be able to enroll and get into the education program. Data is an entire UN is concerned about how to improve the data system. Partnerships like this today is very important. And we need to not work in silos, but work together. And that is a problem that government, civil society, private sectors, all are not working together in order to produce better results. UNESCO is always guided by the CRPD, SDGs, and all the policies, programs, and conventions. And we always like to follow those. So examples are many with us. For example, we also have a regional education information system for students with disability. What the short form is SIRIED. It's a system that provides information about students with disabilities. We continuously work to promoting the fundamentals of freedom of people with disabilities, encouraging stakeholders, and always advancing the rights of persons and children with disabilities. This particular report has 10 key recommendations, which Aarti had put on the screen. The first and two, the one slide has 6 recommendations here, and the slide which follows next has the other 6. I thought instead of going through, reading those out for you, why not show you some videos? And these are just 1-minute videos each. And that's why I don't want to be only talking. Why not you see what we have brought through our recommendation videos on transforming teacher education, overcoming stereotypes in classroom environment and beyond, ensuring specific and adequate financial allocations, and massively expanding the use of ICTs and AI, and establishing a coordination mechanism under MHRD. So I'll request if Aarti or Ishita could play these one after another. I've given the links. Is it possible, Aarti?
Sure, Ishita is playing them.
I can't hear the volume.
Just let me know if it is audible now.
Room arrangements, provision of aids and appliances, and
Yes.
most importantly, a focus on teacher preparation. Currently, teachers who are working either in special schools or in mainstream inclusive settings often lack adequate training and struggle with under-resourced classrooms, which in turn adversely impacts the education of children with disabilities. A 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report recommends transforming teaching practices both at national and state level to better address the needs of diverse learners. The report places emphasis on providing appropriate teacher education, creating open access repositories of teaching learning materials, and development of standardized diagnostic tools in different regional languages. Only when we empower the teachers will we be able to truly empower all of our children.
The next video is on overcoming stereotypes in classroom environment and beyond. This is also very important element and recommendation from us.
One thing of which all of us agree is the need to overcome stereotypes and build positive dispositions towards having inclusive classroom environment and societies. Children with disabilities must not be seen as different. Sometimes our judgment affects them and makes them suffer. The fact that such attitudes are so illogical often leads to the children being faced with criticism. There is a need to launch concerted campaigns and awareness raising at all levels. The 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report has several messages, and one of the key messages is the need to emphasize the rights of children with disabilities to participate in inclusive schools. And that must be our duties, the duties of all stakeholders in respecting, protecting, and fulfilling these rights.
And nothing without funding. So our next video is on ensuring specific and adequate financial allocation.
Families who have a child with disability often face a severe financial burden. The lack of resources also affects the quality of education of the child. While the government allocates limited grants for the education of children with disabilities, issues of management and underutilization of allocated funds also pose many challenges in implementation. Therefore, it is important to streamline financial management systems and procedures to minimize delays in the release of these funds. A 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report recommends ensuring specific and adequate financial allocation in the education budget to meet the learning needs of children with disabilities. The introduction of disability budgeting is a way of helping the government to track resource allocation, review its progress, and establish appropriate accountability.
Now, we know that we are in the time of ICTs and AI, so therefore, massively expanding the use of ICTs will definitely enable the children and persons with disabilities.
Information and communication technologies and assistive technologies play a central role in advancing the education of children with disabilities. They are useful for students with a wide spectrum of disabilities, from learning disabilities to severe physical impairments. ICTs have proven to be instrumental in increasing independence, improving participation, communication, and overall learning outcomes for children with diverse learning needs. While disability laws often fail to include ICTs in the definition of accessibility, India has addressed this by formulating the National Policy on Universal Electronic Accessibility. However, lack of awareness and availability continue to be major barriers in the adoption of ICTs. A 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report recommends massively expanding the use of ICTs for the education of children with disabilities. It is important to develop assistive technologies which are available, accessible, acceptable, adaptable, affordable, and of good quality.
Last but not the least, coordination mechanism is something which is very important, and this video talks about that.
One of the key recommendations is to establish a department under the aegis of the Ministry of Human Resource Development that will look at convergence across ministries. Currently, now there are 3 or 4 ministries that are looking after the needs of children with disabilities. And it is important that there is convergence across these ministries. And if one department can lead in a sense, the programs relating to education for children with disabilities, it would bring in better convergence, and hence implementation will be much stronger.
In conclusion, I reiterate that to ensure rehabilitation, empowerment, and the overall development of CWDs and PWDs, disability needs to be mainstreamed into the implementation plans of SDGs, country and national plans, development programs, and need to be prioritized. We must overcome stereotypes and foster positive attitudes towards children with disabilities in the classroom and beyond. It should and will be our objective to make mainstream education not just available, but accessible, affordable, and appropriate for students with disabilities, ensuring that no one is left behind. We know that we have and they have the rights. But when we look at the realities, which we just briefly discussed today in the 10 minutes provided to me to share with you all, we see that still there are a lot of gaps. But if we are able to fulfill those gaps, then I'm sure the rights will definitely turn into realities. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to more discussion. I hope that the outcomes of this discussion will be good.
That I
Thank
would like
you.
to welcome Prateek, who is Executive Director at ASTHA, and ASTHA has worked tremendously on the ground with children with disabilities around early intervention and education as well. But I'll give it to Prateek, give an introduction about what ASTHA does in a greater detail and share his insights.
Okay, so I'm Prateek. I'm the Executive Director of ASTHA. Before I start, I'll just, for a minute, I'll introduce ASTHA. We are a 31-year-old organization now, and have been intensively working in Delhi's urban slums and resettlement colonies with children with disabilities and their families. We are one of the rare organizations in this country which has transitioned from a special school um, into a community-based organization, and we've learned a lot from that. At present, Astha operates around 6 centers in Delhi, with verticals focusing on early intervention, inclusive education. We also have a national disability helpline, which is being run by two adults with disabilities. And there's a lot of focus on building the disability narrative beyond the disability ecosystem. And we are part of larger state and national level alliances on right to food, education, and homelessness. I mean, Huma Masoodji has covered a lot of policy perspectives, but in terms of ECCD, my presentation is just going to be on two parts. One is the bird's eye view of what's happening with young children with disabilities in this country in terms of policies and laws. And also, I'm going to share some of my experiences in the organization. Um, Out of last 31 years, we've intensively focused on young children's lives, 0 to 8 years, and have tried to work through a standardized, institutionalized work with young children with disabilities. So I'm going to share some of those experiences. Those experiences are in no way to showcase Astha's work, but probably to show that it can be done. Some strategies which have worked for us in past half a decade or so in terms of early intervention, and have brought about change. Sorry?
I think someone was unmute.
Sorry.
You can carry on, Prateek.
Okay. In terms of policies, I won't go into details because Masuji have covered. But just if we focus on ECC, early childhood care and development, near around the RPWD, we also had a mission mode, ICDS mission mode document in 2012. We had a national ECC policy in 2013. And in the last 5 years, there has been growing focus in terms of state ECC councils and RBSK, and what we also know as district early intervention centers in this country. So the idea to speak on rights of children with disabilities in terms of early intervention is now, because in the last 3 to 5 years, a lot has been happening in India, in terms of the build narrative that we need this downward extension of Right to Education Act, and we also need a standardized action-oriented plan for young children with disabilities. I mean, I think two critical questions for us that who are persons with disabilities and where are they? Because of our work in urban slums of Delhi, we've seen that children with disabilities are often isolated and are often overlooked in terms of data management. I won't go into census and World Health Organization's figures, but a major figure of the Lancet, which says that there are nearly 1 crore children with disabilities in this country below 5 years of age. 1 crore children with disabilities under 5. And when the Lancet's research only had an overview of 5 conditions. So the Lancet study just covered 5 conditions, and then they said that we have 1 crore children. The RPWD actually covers 21 disabilities. There's a huge gap there. Um, and I mean, the importance of first 5 years, we all know the Law Commission of India, the Supreme Court of India, the Indian government have all agreed, and various national and international research that the first 5 years are critical. Nearly 80% of brain development happens. And as the previous speaker also said, that we are looking at a humongous population of our young children out of those institutions. Those first 5 to 6 years of life, which are critical for their lifelong quality of life, those are the years which they spend either isolated in their homes or out of institutions. And the direct outcome of it is that we see very few children with disabilities in mainstream education systems. Even now, if we look at data, both national and international, both state and national level data, we see that out of all children with disabilities, out of all children, children with disabilities form nearly 1% to 0.9% of all children. So it's a very bleak figure. Um, Again, I mean, we know about RPWD, but just 30 seconds on RBSK. RBSK, Rashtriya Bal Swasth Karikram, is Government of India's flagship child health screening program. Astha's work is presently in Delhi, and we don't have active RBSK there. RBSK mandates that every district has to have a district early intervention center with a focus that children with disabilities or children with disease, defects, and deficiency are identified as early as possible. So we have laws and systems in place. We have schemes. We have national laws. But it's been nearly 75 years of independence now. The flagship scheme of ICDS has been there for more than 4 decades. But yet we see that there is no comprehensive data on what is the number of children with disabilities in Anganwadis. We now know that what is the number of students who are in the schools, students with disabilities in schools. We have that data at district level, at state level, but we don't have any comprehensive information on the number of children with disabilities in Anganwadi centers. We also don't have any comprehensive information on how many children with disabilities have malnourishment, how many children with disabilities have poor health indicators, or how many children with disabilities have lifelong health consequences. So that is one of the gaps. In terms, so I mean, these 2-3 slides were just to give an overview of what's happening with children with disabilities. I'm going to speak for 5-7 minutes on Astha's experiences with young children with disabilities. Over the last 7 to 8 years, we've done around 2,000 screenings of children in urban slums, and those screenings have been done in heart of the communities, have been done by people who themselves are caregivers of children with disabilities without formal degrees, yet with efficient trainings, and through a very simple program, through a very simple tool, which has been translated in Hindi now, and a lot of disability-based organizations use this in the country. And we found a staggering figure. Out of 2,000 plus screenings we've done, we've nearly identified around 8 to 9% of children with disabilities. So that's a huge figure which we have identified. Post identification of children with disabilities, our work is spread out in 5 to 6 main critical areas. We do a lot of focused work on early literacy and early numeracy, foundational literacy and numeracy for children. We also try and philosophically break down this idea of rehabilitation, where we sometimes think that the rehab of a child with disability will only happen in tertiary care expensive hospitals. So we do a lot of context-driven interventions. We do a lot of hand-holding with parents and break down the myths around rehabilitation. We also have what we call a family-driven process. The assessments which we've been doing in the organization are very context oriented, are very contextual driven, and the parents have a say in that, because we believe that any work with a young child with disability has to happen in partnership with the families. And the activities that we do at Asta centers, and the activities we we facilitate in the Anganwadi centers are multisensory, because finally the population in an Anganwadi center is diverse. There'll be multiple children with diverse conditions. There will be children of different genders, and there will be children with different home context. So the activities have to be multisensory and a twin track approach, because what probably works for a child who's at 2.5 years of age might not work that efficiently. Okay, so I'm Pratik. I'm the
Ayushmita has worked with the Center for Inclusive Policy around certification of people with disabilities. She is a researcher and working with mission accessibility as the institutional consultant. So Ayushmita, can you come in, and we would love to hear from you.
Pratik highlighted an important point in their presentation when they talked about how, at the grassroots level, at the frontline level, sometimes disability identification is just restricted to that, and it doesn't really translate to social protection. And one of the reasons why I have seen that happen is that because there is very little linkage between what is a impairment and what is a disability. Now, if we look at the UNCRPD definition, it clearly states, and RPWD also follows the same. Disability is the interaction of a person's environment along with their impairment, right? Like that's a simple understanding of what disability is. However, what often happens in the cases of children below 10 years of age, in my fieldwork, has come up is that that assessment is restricted to the medical model of disability, in the sense that they might go to a doctor if there's an issue. They might consult some specialists, but that it is limited to that. The assumption often is that it is curable, it is fixable, and in some cases improvement does happen. But the issue is that the term disability often doesn't come up for a lot of the families when their children are young. um, if we look at the assessment guidelines, the latest that came up in 2024, about a year ago right now, it clearly states that for children below a certain age, the first point of contact is a screening committee in the schools. Every school, both private and public, is supposed to have a screening committee. But I think all 200 plus people present in this call would know how many schools actually have that screening committee. So that is where the first bottleneck exists. The screening doesn't happen at the school level. Second is that the guidelines also heavily mention the requirement to go to a pediatrician or a pediatric neurologist or some other specialist who works with children. But unfortunately, the problem is that there is again very little linkage between the health and disability sectors in our country, which means that the pediatrician may not be aware of even a concept called a disability, or which 21 disabilities are included under RPWD, which children will be eligible for a temporary certificate for disability. And that is a huge bottleneck, because what I've seen happen is that if a child has a disability certificate, it entitles them the right to be in schools. I have met families who have sought a disability certificate for their children only because they want to ensure that the school cannot rusticate the child, cannot throw them away, essentially, because then they would be protected, right, by the law. But in case that certificate doesn't exist, which in many cases happens, uh, they are always at a risk of being checked out of the school. And this is especially the case for a lot of children with autism spectrum disorder and psychosocial disabilities, because they are seen as troublemakers. in school. Young 7 8 year old kids who live with autism spectrum disorder are often seen as mischievous and disruptive, which is why they are not entertained in the classrooms. Now, if that child doesn't have a disability assessment and it doesn't have something to prove their disability, nothing protects that kid from being thrown out of that school. The other issue that I have also come up, that I have also noticed, is the murkiness between intellectual disability, specific learning disability, and autism spectrum disorder. What our guidelines do is that they also sort of club these three together and divide them under sections, which is why a lot of the assessors, a lot of the CMOs, who are more often than not aware the full extent of these assessment guidelines, give away a certificate for an intellectual disability for kids who live with autism spectrum disorder. And in some situations which are even worse, they are given certificates of mental retardation. Now we know that mental retardation is an outdated term. Since 2016 we don't have the disability recognized, but the reality is that retardation is still given away as a certificate. It's mentioned in the UDIDs also. And I have seen such UDIDs where 6 7 year old kids have been given mental retardation certificate of 80%, which again puts them in a lot of jeopardy, because when we look at that word, any institution, any school would not want to entertain that kid.
Now, we start off with session 2, which is addressing issues in the school age, that is 2 to 18 years. And coming up first is Dr. Shilpa Manogna. She is Associate Professor, Department of Education of Groups with Special Needs, NCRT. So Dr. Shilpa will be talking about the school admission requirements, support services in schools, higher education, and mainstreaming issues, with special emphasis on how to go about dealing with real-time issues in the school system. Over to you, Dr. Shilpa.
I'm straight away going to the topic of what kind of laws are protecting the educational rights of children with disabilities. So basically, when we talk from the Indian scenario, we have the Right to Free and Compulsory Education, RTE Act 2009, and the Persons with Disabilities Act, the rights of RPWD Act in short, which are protecting the rights of children with disabilities at large, and very specifically educational disabilities. But if you can see over here, the emphasis in the RTE Act is that free and compulsory education has to be provided by the government from the age of 6 to 14 years. Okay, that is until the completion of the elementary education, whereas Persons with Disability Act says that the same free and compulsory education has to be provided from the age of 6 to 18 years. Now, this is because of the disability condition, assuming that certain children are going to face cognitive limitations and other disadvantages which arise due to having, a disability condition. So the age has been extended, and it also gives an option, a choice, that if the child has the choice of choosing a neighborhood school, which means a mainstream school, a regular school, or in a special school, wherever the child feels that the educational needs are going to be met. Because often many of the parents have this particular concern, that where do I put my child? Is the special school better, or a regular school better? But let me tell you, there is no one right answer. Okay, so for parents and for young professionals who have entered into the field of disability rehabilitation and are working in the area of education, I would request you to go through this literature, which is also projected in the slides, which will tell you about what are the various educational rights. Okay, so basically, as per the Samagra Shiksha scheme, you have a lot of support services available in the schools for meeting the various needs of children with disabilities, right from identification to assessment, having individualized educational plans as per the needs of the students, then providing them the aids and appliances, giving them the assistive technology which will help them in pursuing the education, the curricular adaptations, having, many of the Samagra Shikshas have come up with sensory integration rooms to meet the needs of children with autism, then the therapeutic services in block and cluster resource centers, sports training, pre-vocational training has been started in many of the states. You look at Punjab, you look at Haryana, then if you look at Delhi, you will see that the resource centers have started with vocational activities for children with disabilities, knowing the need that some of the children with disabilities may not actually benefit from the regular curriculum which is existing. So you can see certain pictures. These are the support pictures, like especially if the children are in the mainstream school, in the mainstream class, then these literature is really going to help the teachers as well as teacher trainees, teacher educators, and it's beautifully written in a very simple language. Parents can also go through them. So we'll not go into the details of NEP 2020, but I just want to tell one thing, that NEP 2020 really looks at the concept of inclusive education from a big umbrella and is in total consonance with the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Okay, so this is something very important, and the policy very clearly emphasizes that school education has to be inclusive in all terms. It does talk about children with disabilities, but it talks about total inclusion with a big picture, where inclusion of children with disabilities is there, inclusion of children with minority children, tribal children, gender, transgender, everything is talked about under the equitable and inclusive education. So I am highlighting here that as per the UDICE data for the year 21-23, you can see that around 22 lakhs or roughly around 23 lakhs of children with special needs are enrolled from pre-primary to class 12. I'm not saying that these numbers are very, very encouraging, but what I want the audience to look at is that, things have changed, perceptions have changed, stereotypes are getting reduced, people are becoming more aware about the needs of children with disabilities. So this is a positive thing, and we need to appreciate the change which has happened across the past 15-20 years, for the past 2 decades. Yes, with keeping this journey in mind, we need to look at where else we have to go and what else needs to be done. Okay, so now very specifically, I am coming to the criteria of admission in government and aided schools for children with disabilities. This is a generalized data which I am giving you over here, the guidelines. From state government to state government, these guidelines are going to vary. But this is, as of now, the data I'm producing is from the government of Delhi NCT. I've given the reference over here. So you can see that these guidelines are for nursery to class 5, and there are separate guidelines for class 6 to class 12 also. See at what age the child has to, will be given entry into the school system, into the mainstream schools under the aegis of the government of the Directorate of Education NCT Delhi. They all follow these particular guidelines. All these are available in the in the website. The order has been given, and I'm sure Neuroaid is coming up, is likely to come up with a very short brochure and bulletin about all these resources for the handy use to the parents and other stakeholders. Okay, and the entire online the procedure of admission is online. So it's not that, so as parents or as professionals in the field, first we need to know what is the system. Only then we can guide the parents. If I as a special educator, or if I as a therapist, for that matter, any person dealing with children with disabilities or special needs, I need to be aware about what is the actual procedure so that I can tell to the parents. The organizers, please do let me know if I'm overstepping the time. Just give me a warning 2 minutes before, and I'll be quick enough to wind up. Over here, parents have to apply online and select the nearby schools, because all the rules are according to RTE Act. So the nearby schools within the vicinity have to be selected. Okay, so that is most important while selecting. And if we do not have certain documents, the online application is not going to take, or your application is not going to be fully filled. So we need to keep these particular essential documents ready before you actually log in and then start applying. Some of the most important documents is disability certificate, which clearly tells what is the percentage type of disability and percentage of disability. Say, for example, intellectual disability, percentage of disability 50%, 60%. Why? Because these particular things are only for benchmark disabilities. That means if a child is having a disability of 40% or more only, all these particular government concessions, norms, procedures, and all will be applicable to the child. So benchmark disability is very, very important. And there's a UDID card, if it is there, it is important. Now the big question arises, no, I do not have a disability certificate, but I do know that my child is disabled, and what do I do and all. So now here, let me tell you, it is very essential to get the disability certificate, but nevertheless, it does not mean that if you do not have a disability certificate, you will be denied admission into the school. You'll always be given an extra time period to procure the disability certificate and produce, so that the school authorities knows under which category they are being given the admission.
To move to the next speaker, we have Jaspreet Kaur, Principal, Amrit Masonic School, Noida, and she's also a parent, and also associated with NIOS for a very, very long time, and she's been instrumental in helping out a lot of children and their parents through the NIOS system. So over to Mrs. Jaspreet Kaur. Preeti, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, Monica. Thank you so much. I'm echoing. No, it's okay now. No longer echoing, am I? It's been wonderful listening in, to what all the panelists have been saying. And in fact, Monica, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in fact, I think Shilpa being my predecessor was a very apt thing. Basically, where all that Shilpa spoke about, जहाँ वो खत्म होता है वहां से हम शुरू होते हैं. See, because I'm this major believer in, of course, the biggest advocate of NIS you'll find, but also a major believer in the government institutions. I'm primarily a mother. A lot of things, but primarily a mother to a special needs adult. She's 22 now, named Ekam Kaur. And she has done a senior secondary certification through NIOS. So, I've put my money where my mouth is. So I can, really vouch for the NIS system. But what Shilpa said, that the government of India has made these innumerable, the tons and tons of accommodations, the road to admission to the government schools is very easy. But what she said at the very end, that are we actually, are we actually all we're talking about is admission to a regular school? Or are what we're looking at is educating our children? Because, I have two daughters. The younger one is so-called neurotypical. She's now studying medicine. And the elder one is the one who's been through the NIS system. My point, exactly, the reason I went looking for NIS, she was going to a very good inclusive school, And then at one point, I had to go look for something that would actually teach her. I think this feeling will resonate with every special needs parent sitting here listening in, because I put her into a inclusive school, a regular school, and then at one point I went looking for somebody who would teach her. Do you see the irony in the statement? So when she was 14 years old, the school told me she's not educable. And at home she was reading Enid Blyton, and I didn't know what educable meant. That's when I went looking for a system that would certify her, that would finish her formal education. We'll come to that later. So what is NIOS? I'd like to speak, for a while, and then I'll summarize all that I've said through slides. Very quickly, National Institute of Open Schooling. तो आप सबने सुना है वो ओपन से बीएड कर रही है, वो ओपन से एमबीए कर रही है. So, we all know of people finishing their college and vocational education through the open system. NIOS is the open system at school level. In the Indian context, we have 3 national boards, CBSE, ICSE, and NIOS. So the certificate, 10th and 12th certificate from NIOS is as valid as a 10th and 12th certificate from CBSE or ICSE. That takes care of, is NIOS valid? So what is NIOS ho gaya? Who is NIOS meant for? Okay, so anybody who wants to learn at their own pace, or anybody who cannot access the conventional education system. Own pace, musicians, sports people, prodigies who need to devote time to their art, but would still need to complete the education, they will go to the NIOS. Then people who can't access the conventional system, very poor children, who cannot afford formal education, and children with special needs, who, because of their varied challenges, cannot access the conventional system. Now, within special needs children, of course, several classifications. I would like to go with basic 2 broad ones, physical and intellectual. A physically disabled student cannot logistically, let's say somebody who has cerebral palsy or who gets seizures, cannot logistically access the conventional school system. NIS is perfect for him. Intellectual disability, intellectually challenged, intellectual disabilities, children on the autism spectrum, Down syndrome, everything else, even children with learning difficulties, not learning disabilities alone, children with learning difficulties also. Why do they need to see, access the NIS system? I think the statement I'm going to make now is the most valid. It would be the most important of what, the core of all my work for the last 30 years has been. I'm a firm believer in 2 aspects. One, what you have children with special needs, whatever way you're trying to rehabilitate them, whatever rehabilitation services you're using. I'm a firm believer, and this is my vision, that all those rehabilitation services will become super optimized if they are combined with adequate mental stimulation. I'm sure we've all heard of this. With whatever disability, somebody's allowed to go in with you to explain, to afford you as much or as little help as you need. So somebody can accompany you, can bring their own computer, and this year I was part of the team that did it. A team from NIS went to 15 students who were completely paralyzed. And
the first question, this is addressed to Pratik ji and Ayushmita ji. What is the earliest age that the UDID card can be made? And some parents are not really clear about the temporary and the permanent one. So can you just take that up quickly?
Monica, Ayushmita can answer. Just one thing, for every family or individual across the country, I'll be putting up a WhatsApp number and a helpline number of ASA's helpline number. All queries, support, handholding regarding disability certificates and pension will do end-to-end.
Okay, so as Preet ji, thank you so very much for being present here. Thank you so much.